Hi, I'm Doug Goldstein. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen today. One of the big issues that comes across my desk frequently is I'm talking to American citizens who live outside the United States, and they're dealing, especially in the middle of the year when they're beginning to deal with their taxes and they're pulling out their hair and they're saying, "What am I doing this for? Why do I constantly have to deal with all this? Why don't I just give up my US citizenship?" And the fact is, it's a very good question, and lots of people do it, believe it or not. But there are a lot of issues related to it. It's not only a question about not having to file a US tax return once a year or dealing with US taxes. There's a lot more to it. So I figured that the best person to bring into this discussion would be an international tax lawyer and my friend, Eli Clark, who specializes in cross-border clients and has done a great deal of work with helping Americans renounce their US citizenship. So, Ellie, as we dive in, and I'd like to absolutely talk about some of the tax issues and exit tax and all the technical details, but there's a lot of emotional details that come into play here. You know, I love America. I'm a New York Yankees fan, and I can't imagine that I would not be able to vote in the U.S. elections anymore, or be an American. How do you deal with that with people?
It's an excellent question. But first of all, I have to tell you, as a Yankees fan, sorry about what happened in the World Series. It was very crushing to be shut out for 4-1. Okay. The truth is, it's a very big issue. And I have many people who ran the numbers, looked at things from a very cold, calculating, financial perspective and said, this makes sense. And yet, when it finally came time to decide, am I willing to do this? It was very hard. And some of them decided I can't do it. And I had one client who did it. And he said, I didn't expect it to be such an emotional experience.
Wow.
So it's just, this, but we're programmed. We have our memories, we have our associations, we have our cultural identity, and it's hard. And, if it's too hard, I think, I would never push somebody to do something that they don't feel 100% that they should, that they really
I'm assuming
want
you
to do
haven't
it.
worked with those people who get on TV all the time and say, if so and so wins the election, or I can't stand this guy, I'm going to leave the country if this happens. I assume that's not the type of people you're talking to.
Yeah, and most of them don't leave. I know that's the reality, and
Right.
that's probably a good thing.
Right. And for the story that you just told, one of the important things to remember is it's not like you can do it and then, a month later say, I changed my mind, guys. Can I have my
Yeah,
passport back?
no, yeah, there are no do-overs, and that's
No.
actually when you go there. We'll talk about the process. When you go there, that's one of the first things they say. Before we finalize this, that there's no backsies. You can't. There are no redos. This is final.
So, okay. I mean, certainly the issue that I hear the most about as an investment advisor, I always tell my clients, I don't give tax advice, but you're going to have to pay tax on this. Speak to your accountant. And that's where this discussion really begins. How much do taxes really play in the role of someone making a decision of whether to give up his citizenship?
The answer is very rarely. Although I actually can think of a very prominent example where income tax was the main issue. But the reality is that most of us, and I assume most of the people listening to this show, are Israeli. And that means what you don't pay to America, you end up paying to Israel. And that's true for the overwhelming majority of the people I know and the majority of my clients who I work with. But there are exceptions.
So what would you say the main reason is that people are looking to expatriate?
So for a lot of people, the change in the banking rules, as you know, there was a law that America passed called FATCA, which most people don't know. But what people do know is you go to the bank, and the minute you tell them you're American, there's this terror in the eye of the bank of the banker, of the teller, and everything you want to do in with any financial institution outside the United States is harder. There's paperwork. People have been, and they said, I was at this bank for 40 years. Suddenly they're looking at me like a criminal. That's a real good reason to say, I don't want to have to deal with this anymore.
So if you give up your U.S. citizenship and then go back to the bank and speak with your American accent, they're going to say, well, who are you kidding? How do we know you really did that? And once, well, let's answer that question, then will they treat you like any other Israeli or non-American?
Yes. Yeah. So the answer is there are two ways you can prove to them, yeah, I'm still a Yankees fan, but no, I'm not a U.S. citizen. And that is, or a Mets fan. That's also allowed. But in any case, the answer is that at the end of the process, you actually get a piece of paper that says this person is no longer American. And in many cases, there's just a form the bank form that you fill out and you sign and you promise, pinky swear that you're not American anymore.
That letter, is that the one called the Certificate of Loss of Nationality?
That's what it's called.
So that's an important document that people have. So what would you say are some of the surprises that people have once they go through this process and then they're no longer Americans and they go, wait a second, I didn't realize that. Would you any special unrealizations that people have?
Not too much. I think the most surprising thing that people have is, I always try to prepare people for the process. And I say, it's really not hard and it's not scary. And everybody listens to me and they nod and they say, yeah, sure, okay. And then at the end of the process, they call me and said, that really wasn't hard. I wasn't expecting it to be as simple. And that's usually the one. But no, you should not, this is an important decision. And it can really change a lot of things. And it's not something that you should go into unless you've really thought it out very carefully.
One of the things I think a lot of people are concerned about is they'll give up their U.S. citizenship and then they won't be able to go back to America. What's the story behind that?
Okay, so there's really two questions. First question is, if I'm not American, how do I get in? And the answer used to be, you got to go to the embassy and get a visa. As most people in Israel who are not U.S. citizens know, that's no longer the case. There's a very easy process. It's called ESTA. You basically go online, put in some information, pay, I think it's like $15 or some very nominal amount. And now for the next 2 years, you can go into America freely. So
with your Israeli passport.
With your, yes, or any other passport. Yeah, specifically with Israel. This procedure was available to residents of other countries or citizens of other countries, like British citizens. So lots of people who made Aliyah to Israel, they still have their UK citizenship, could already have this available to them for decades. With Israel, it's a relatively new thing, but so travel is really a non-issue. It used to be somewhat of an issue. The other question they always ask me is, well, if I give it up, do they put me on a blacklist? Okay. And it's just a very reasonable question to ask. And the answer is nothing like that exists. And literally there were people, even in the olden days, who gave up their citizenship on Monday, and 3 days later, they went back to the embassy to say, hi, I'd like a visa. And they got it on the spot.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not an issue.
I think another big fear that people have is, especially for retirees, they worked in America for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They moved to Israel. They are relying on the Social Security payments they have. And they say, wait a second, now that I've given up my U.S. citizenship, I'm not going to be entitled to that anymore. How do you explain that to them?
So I think that's one of the most frequent questions I've been asked. And I've been doing this for more than 10 years.
Me too.
And everybody says, but I lose my Social Security, right? And the answer is no. The short answer, it's just that simple. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with citizenship. If you put the money away and your number is still valid, that you will get all the benefits. There's zero impact on Social Security.
Got it. And just while we're talking on that line, what about their other pension plans, their IRA accounts? How does that work?
That The answer is usually it's the same. Meaning, if you've put money away or if you have money in an investment account, it's still yours. No one's going to take it away from you because you're not a U.S. citizen. Now, of course, you may also still have income tax obligations. The more that really depends. I don't want to get into the details, but it really depends on a wide range of factors. You're living here, the income is coming from there. Do you pay taxes to America? Do you pay taxes to Israel? Complicated stuff. But the bottom line is there are circumstances where you will still need to pay to do some kind of income tax reporting to the United States, depending on the nature of the income. And you may have to pay taxes there. But as I said, if you didn't, you'd still have to pay the taxes here. So in most cases, but not all, and I think we should talk about one of the exceptions to that. In most cases, whatever you don't pay to America, you pay to Israel. And most of the people who moved here would probably rather pay the taxes to Israel anyway.
So let's go. What is that example that we should be aware of? And again, we're not giving any specific advice here. Just
it's a really
questions to ask your advisors.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak in general, but there are many situations where I live here and I'm selling a piece of real estate, my home usually, and I'm selling it, and under Israeli law, I don't owe any taxes. Again, not going into details. And yet, for American purposes, either because I'm not entitled or because there is an exemption, but it's not as generous, I could end up having to pay a lot of tax on the gain from the sale of that house. And I had, as I said, there are other things you can do, perhaps, to mitigate that problem. Again, not our main topic. I don't want to get into the details, but I had one client who had a piece of property that he inherited. It was worth a lot of money, and Israel was not going to tax it, and America was going to tax it big time. And he said, I'm giving up my citizenship.
And so let's go through more myths then as relates to this very story. So some people say, but it's illegal to give up your citizenship to avoid taxes. And I think they haven't quite gotten the story correct. Could you explain how that works?
Yeah. So the answer is, there is a specific principle, and when you go through the process, they will mention this in the interview. There is an interview as part of the procedure, and they'll say you should know that if your main purpose is to avoid American taxation, then we can reject your application. We can cancel. So, but the short answer is this: for most people, it's not a one-issue decision. For most people, as we said, it's dealing with the banking, and or just having to file a tax return every year. Now, filing a tax return is not avoiding it. Wanting to not have to file every year isn't avoiding tax. It's just avoiding accountants, which is not just a crime. It might actually be a mitzvah. But as a practical matter, there's enough harassment. There's enough bureaucracy that's involved in trying to be an American who lives abroad that, yes, in a general sense, there may be a certain situation where I have a specific transaction where I might end up paying less taxes, but that's so unusual that it's really not as a practical matter. I don't think it's a consideration, and certainly not illegal.
So if someone comes to you and says, I'm tired of having to deal with all the taxes, double taxation, I own my own company, I have to pay Obamacare, and I don't even get healthcare benefits, I'm just tired of it. That's not illegal for him to then use that as his launching point to go and give up his U.S. citizenship.
Absolutely.
So another myth I think that a lot of people have is that renunciation of citizenship really only applies to the ultra wealthy. What do you say about that?
The answer is that actually, not only is that not the case, for the ultra wealthy, it's much more problematic to try to give up your citizenship. And this is a complicated topic, but America created something aimed at the ultra wealthy, and it's called an exit tax. And when I say ultra wealthy, the original law was passed because some super wealthy guy was an heir to a cardboard box fortune, decided to give up his citizenship and save a lot of money. And the Congress was so upset about this, they said, great, we're going to change the law. Now, if you have a lot of money and you give up your citizenship, we're going to tax you on your property as though you sold it on the day you stopped being an American.
So it's not an estate tax. It's not like a death tax. Rather, it's a capital gains tax.
That's correct. And there are lots of exceptions, and there are lots of situations where it doesn't matter. It won't affect most people. And even people whom it might affect, there may be other ways to mitigate the tax. But it's really, really aimed at the super wealthy. Whereas nice middle class, even upper middle class people could probably do it without it having any lasting effect.
So let's say there's a couple that has a net worth of $2, $3, $4 million. Are they reasonable candidates, assuming that all the other pieces of the puzzle fit in without having to worry about some huge exit tax?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it's funny you use that number because 2 million per person is actually the threshold. Meaning, if I'm filing my US tax returns and my net worth is up to 2 million, there's no tax. I don't even have to think about it. And even if I'm a little bit over, the IRS rules are fairly generous. And they say, you know what? We're not here to hurt people, especially like you say, not the super wealthy. So up to $600,000 or $700,000 of capital gain, we're not taxing you. So you could be over the $2 million threshold, and you could actually have a situation where this pretend sale, this imaginary sale, this conceptual sale would trigger tax. And the IRS still says, yeah, but if the total tax is under a certain amount, it doesn't matter. We're going to let you go.
Okay, so let's talk about that group a little further. One of the other myths hopefully it is a myth that you will now dispel, is that even after you give up your US citizenship, you're still required to file a US tax return for the next 10 years. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, and it's a myth now, but it's not so much a myth. What it is it's just people who aren't up to date. There was such a law. Now, people who live in Israel may remember the name Sherry Arison. So Sherry Arison was the heir to this Carnival Cruise fortune. And the famous story was her father was American, Ted Arison, and he gave up his US citizenship, and he had this 10-year term, and he died about halfway through the 10th year and had to pay mountains of US taxes because he just missed that point where he would have been out of the woods. So it's not so much a myth as it is something that used to be true and isn't true.
Got it. So once you go through the process at that point, so then you're done. In other words, you don't have to worry about it?
Largely, but again, a lot depends on where your money is and where your income is. So the simplest thing and the easiest answer is, if I live in Israel and I have nothing left in America, then by giving up my citizenship, I will not have to report to America anymore, and I will have no need and no obligation to file with the IRS or to do anything with the IRS ever again for the rest of my life, period. The more stuff you still have in America, if you have a portfolio investment account, if you have real estate there, then the question is much more complicated. And we've been focusing on the exit tax, but there's also the estate tax issue. And this is important.
Okay. So I just want to clarify. Let's target this a little more, because I know this discussion can go very, very broadly.
Yeah.
But the types of people who are probably listening, the people that I normally talk to, are people who have US brokerage accounts, bank accounts, and IRA accounts. Those are the people that we really deal with. So let's focus it on that. Let's say that a person has, let's use this example we used before. A couple has $4 million in stocks and bonds and mutual funds. Some of it's in IRAs, some of it's in brokerage accounts, and that's it. They don't have any real estate. That's their whole position. They've been living in Israel for many years, and they feel that they're finished with their US citizenship, so they go ahead and give up on that. What are the risks they have? And you were starting with the estate tax, but what other issues should they think about?
Well, actually, the main one is the estate tax, because there is a very curious rule in America. And when I say curious, that's actually too diplomatic. There is a blatantly discriminatory rule regarding the US estate tax. Today, if you're a US citizen and you pass away, you can leave up to $13.6 million to your loved ones, to your heirs, if they're not loved, also, without having to pay, without incurring any estate tax. Now, if you're a non-American, you only have to worry about your assets in America. But the exemption isn't $13.6 million, it's $60,000, 6030. That's a very big difference. So if I have, let's say, $500,000 in an investment account in America, and I'm no longer a US citizen, upon my death, unless I have very specific kinds of assets, and we can talk about which ones those are, any amount over 60,000, which in our case would mean $440,000 of my investment account, will be subject to tax, and that's a 40% tax, which is punishing. It's really not worth it. Now, not everything you invest in could be counted. The best example of that is U.S. bonds. I think we actually had a discussion about this recently. CDs, certain kinds of U.S. investments are completely insulated from this tax exposure. But if I just have some nice U.S. equities, a little bit of Apple, maybe a little bit of NVIDIA, if I was smart enough to get in there early, those would be taxable.
Got it. So that means, just to be very clear, let's say that a couple has $4 million worth of a portfolio and bank deposits, some in CDs, some in bonds, but also some in stocks and U.S. mutual funds, and they give up their U.S. citizenship. At that moment, then, they are subject to an estate tax.
No, not at that moment. If only after they pass away.
Right, I'm saying they're subject to it, meaning if they were to, they walk out of the embassy with their certificate of loss of nationality and they get hit by a bus, that portfolio could be subject to an estate tax of 40% for everything above $60,000.
Right.
Does that include their IRAs as well?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Got it.
Now, here's the interesting thing. I have clients who have creative approaches to this. So one is, and this was true in one of the cases I just mentioned earlier in our conversation, one spouse gave up citizenship and the other didn't. And then they just put all the assets in the name of the U.S. spouse. The one who didn't want to be a U.S. citizen anymore doesn't have to worry about it and doesn't own anything in America, so there's no estate tax issue. And sometimes I have that situation not for financial reasons, but going back to what we said at the beginning, for emotional reasons. One of the spouses was, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and I'm not American. I mean, I live here, my life is here, I'm getting rid of it. And the other was, yeah, but that's where I grew up. Yeah. I still, when I hear that Star Spangled Banner, my heart just bursts, and I'm not ready to give it up. And there's no, you would think, well, I'm a husband and wife. We've been together for 20, 30, 40, 60, 70 years. How can we do that? The answer is the law doesn't have any issue with one spouse giving up citizenship and the other retaining.
I think also an important point to make regarding the portfolios, since I deal on the investment side, I have a lot of clients who are not Americans from the outset. In other words, Israelis who come to me and say, Doug, listen, I've got $1 million. I'd like to open a US brokerage account. But I've heard there's this estate tax. And I say, yes, you're correct about that. If you do it the wrong way with someone who doesn't know what he's doing, you really could be hurt if you die.
Right. Right.
But if you set up the portfolio the right way, using the proper types of funds and the proper structuring, you can actually completely eliminate that risk 100%.
100%.
And all legally, nothing,
Totally.
funny
And,
business.
and as a lawyer, I can say also there are legal mechanisms. There's something called an irrevocable trust, which I can set up, or my wife and I can set up, and we can put everything in there. And then, whether we're citizens or not, stops being relevant.
Right. So I think it's important to realize that when you hear problems with this, people say, oh, yeah, but if you give up your citizenship, then you're going to lose 40% of your estate when you die. The answer is it's true, but just make sure you set it up the proper way and it won't be a problem. These are standard issues that cross-border professionals work with all the time. Ellie, actually, I see we're out of time. Thinking of time, we're just about out of time. I wanted to really go through the steps of expatriation, but I think really the bottom line is don't try this at home, right? It's not that it's so complicated as you said in the beginning. It's a procedure. There are steps, but you do need to have expert care in doing that, both on the legal side, and make sure that your accountant is someone who's familiar with this, and that your financial advisor is someone who's familiar with this. And then when you have the right team in place, then if you decide this is appropriate for you, then you can go ahead and do it. So Ellie, for people who want to begin to build their team and would like to be in touch with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, so I'll answer that, but what you said before really reminds me of the fact that too many people take the advice they get at the Kiddush and Shul and make their decisions based on that. So I think the first step is, check it out with somebody who might know a little bit more than the guy holding the little cracker and herring. I have a phone number. I have an email address. Anyone who wants to speak to me, has more questions, is welcome to contact me. I can.
Well, why don't you share that with us now, and then we will also post that.
I think, yeah. So the phone number is 050-768-1368. And of course, nowadays you can send a WhatsApp message to that number as well. My email is harder to remember by heart. It's Eli, E-L-I, .d, as in Doug, .Clark, C-L-A-R-K, at I-N, as in Nancy, C as in cat, S as in Sam, -law, L-E-W.com.
Okay, and we will, of course, post that as well. Ellie, it's been a pleasure actually, A, talking to you, B, working with you on clients that we've had who have, in fact, gone through this. And like you said, it's a procedure, but it's just one of many procedures. It is a doable thing. This is not a recommendation. Personally, I like baseball, apple pie. I don't know about Chevrolet anymore, as the old expression goes, but I do feel good when I hear the Star Spangled Banner. And so I just think it's something that people really need to consider from a very, very strategic point of view. If this is relevant to anyone here, please be in touch with either me or with Ellie or with your qualified professional who can really help you take care of this. Eli Clark, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.